The ground beneath your feet is lying to you. Right now, as you sit in your chair or hold your phone, you feel a sense of stability. You think the Earth is a finished product, a static, solid rock. But you are wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. Beneath the crust there is a machine, a violent churning engine of molten iron and shifting plates that has been trying to redesign the surface of this planet for 4 billion years. Most of the time this machine works in silence. But in certain corners of the map, the skin of the Earth is pulled thin, the machine breaks through, and when it does, it creates things that should not exist. Welcome to a journey into the impossible. We aren't here to look at postcards. We are here to witness the glitches in the matrix. We are going to the places that look like they were designed for an alien world, places that are so hostile to human life they should have remained hidden forever. We are starting in Africa, not the Africa of safaris and savannas you have seen on TV, but the Africa of the Great Rift. A scar so deep it is literally tearing the continent into two separate land masses. Buckle up, the air is about to get thin, the water is about to turn to acid, and the landscape is about to start watching you back. The gateway to the underworld. To find the first wonder on our list, you must abandon the concept of a vacation. You are not a tourist here. You are a biological anomaly, a soft, water-filled creature trespassing in a kiln designed for geology, not biology. You have traveled to the Afar Triangle in northern Ethiopia, a place often hyperbolically described as hell on earth, yet the reality is far more alien. As you step out of your vehicle, the sensation is immediate and violent. You are standing at one of the lowest points on the African continent, 410 feet below sea level. The atmospheric pressure is heavy, pressing against your eardrums, but it is the heat that dominates your existence. It hits you like a physical wall, a tangible barrier of thermal energy. We are talking about a consistent, punishing 120 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade. Though finding shade here is a fool's errand, the sun does not merely shine, it assaults the ground. The wind, which you might pray for in any other desert, offers no relief. It is a convection oven blast, whipping hot dust and salt particles into your lungs until you feel like you are inhaling liquid fire. This is the Danakil Depression, and it is a place where the planet is tearing itself apart. Geologically speaking, you are standing inside a massive active crime scene. This is the Afar Triple Junction. A rare tectonic phenomenon where three massive plates, the African Nubian, the African Somalian, and the Arabian, are all pulling away from one another. The tension is palpable. The Earth's crust here has been stretched so thin, like pulled taffy, that the molten mantle is practically touching the surface. The ground beneath your boots is not stable. It is a thin, fragile scab over a wound that refuses to heal. And the result of this tectonic violence is Dalol. As you walk toward the Dalol hydrothermal fields, your brain struggles to process the visual input. It begins to short-circuit. because the color palette is wrong. Evolution has trained your eyes to recognize the browns of earth, the greens of plants, and the blues of water, but here the landscape is a psychedelic hallucination. It looks like a neon yellow forest of mineral mushrooms surrounded by bubbling pools of electric green water and pillars of salt that resemble frozen, jagged waves of crimson and ochre. It is breathtakingly beautiful, a masterpiece of abstract art. But do not be seduced. Do not touch it. Those pools are not water. They are a hyperconcentrated chemical soup of sulfuric acid, iron oxide, and magnesium. The pH level in many of these pools is near zero, and in some cases even negative. If you were to dip your hand in, the acid would not just burn, it would begin to dissolve the lipid barriers of your skin while the heat cooked the tissue. The air itself is weaponized, thick with chlorine, sulfur, and toxic gases bubbling up from the magma chambers below. One deep breath in a low-lying pocket of air could overwhelm your respiratory system, causing immediate chemical pneumonia. This is a place where nature has emphatically decided that life is an intruder. It is no wonder that NASA scientists and astrobiologists flock here. They do not come to study Earth, they come to study the limits of life, using Danakil as a proxy for Io, one of Jupiter's volcanic moons, or the primordial acid oceans of early Mars. Yet amidst this hostility, there is a profound human mystery. In the middle of this toxic yellow wasteland, you see shadows moving in the shimmering heat haze, humans, the Afar people. For centuries, they have navigated this gateway to the underworld, not to die, but to work. They are here for the white gold, salt. Before modern currency, bars of salt known as amole were the primary money of Ethiopia, and the Danakil is the bank. You watch them, figures carved from resilience, cutting blocks of salt from the crust by hand. They work under a sun that can end a man's journey in hours if he runs out of water, swinging adzes to pry the slabs from the drying lake bed. They load these rectangular blocks onto camel caravans that stretch for miles across the blinding white horizon. It is a scene of biblical antiquity, a window into a time before the combustion engine, before electricity. Why do they do it? Because in the Danakil, the earth gives nothing for free. You pay in sweat, you pay in the degradation of your body, and you pay in the knowledge that you are standing on a ticking time bomb. Geologists know the ultimate fate of this place. As the plates continue to pull apart, the rift will eventually grow too wide. The Red Sea, currently held back by low hills to the east, will inevitably breach the barriers. It will flood in, drowning the salt pans, the acid pools, and the volcanic vents. This entire landscape will vanish beneath the waves to become the floor of a new ocean, splitting Africa forever. But for now, it remains the most colorful, lethal, and defiant masterpiece on the planet. We leave the silent, searing chemical fires of the desert and move south toward a vibration. At first you feel it in the soles of your feet rather than hear it. As we approach the border between Zambia and Zimbabwe, a sound begins to manifest. It is a low, resonant hum in the distance, like the engine of a massive freight train. You might look at the horizon and think a storm is approaching. 10 miles out, you see a massive white cloud billowing into the sky, rising nearly 1,000 feet from the flat savanna. But the sky above is a piercing blue. The locals, the Kololo and Lozi people, named this phenomenon with poetic precision, Mosi Oa Tunya, the smoke that thunders. To the Western maps, it is Victoria Falls. Imagine the Zambezi River. Upstream, it is a wide, lazy, meandering body of water, nearly 1 mile across, flowing peacefully through the African bush. Hippos grunt in the shallows, elephants wade across the calm currents, and then, without a single geological warning, no rapids, no increasing slope, the entire river simply falls off the face of the earth. You are standing on the edge of a basalt fracture, looking into a 350-foot abyss. It is not just a waterfall, it is the largest curtain of falling water in the world, stretching over 5,500 feet wide. During the height of the flood season, roughly 130 million gallons of water plummet over this edge every single minute. The statistics are overwhelming, but the visceral experience is spiritual. The water does not just hit the bottom. The force is so immense, the velocity so high, that the water atomizes upon impact. It explodes into a permanent upward rainstorm, a microclimate of mist that sustains a lush, dripping rainforest on the opposite cliff, a tiny ecosystem that exists solely because of the spray, right in the middle of a dry woodland region. But let us get closer. Let us test your nerve. If you are brave, or perhaps a bit reckless, you can visit the edge during the dry season when the water levels drop. You can swim out to the Devil's Pool. This is a natural rock eddy, a small lip of basalt, right at the very precipice of the falls. You can literally jump into the water and let the current carry you until your stomach scrapes the rock wall that separates you from the drop. Think about that position for a second. You are lying in a pool of tepid water, and inches from your face, the entire volume of the Zambezi River is screaming past you, hurtling into a black, churning void. The roar is deafening. It obliterates thought. One slip, one failed rock grip, one surge of water, and you are gone. It is the ultimate adrenaline trap. A confrontation with gravity in its most raw form. Victoria Falls is not just a scenic view. It is a lesson in the power of erosion. The gorge you are looking into is actually the seventh gorge. Over the last 2 million years, the waterfall has been retreating. The Zambezi flows over a plateau of basalt, filled with cracks, filled with softer sandstone. As the water erodes the soft sandstone, it cuts a trench. The waterfall drops into the trench, and then eventually the river cuts a new path, leaving the old cliff dry. The result is a massive zigzag scar across the landscape, a geological timeline showing exactly where the falls used to be 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 years ago. It is a monument to persistence, a reminder that water, the very thing we need to survive, is also the most powerful chisel in the universe. We now leave the continent entirely. We cross the Mozambique Channel to an island that has been drifting in splendid isolation for 88 million years. Madagascar. This island is a laboratory of evolution, a place where nature was allowed to run wild without the interference of the mainland's biological rules. Because of this isolation, evolution went a little crazy here. Imagine you are driving down a dusty, potholed red clay road in the Manabe region on the western coast. The sun is starting to set, casting long, bruised purple and orange shadows across the scrubby plains, and then they appear. The baobabs. These are not trees in the traditional sense. They do not look like oaks or pines. They look like errors in the code of reality. They resemble giant prehistoric columns of flesh. Their trunks are massive, smooth and swollen, shimmering with a coppery pink bark that feels more like skin than wood. They reach up to 98 feet in height, cylindrical towers that dominate the flat horizon. But it is the tops that mess with your head. The branches are stunted, gnarled and twisted, looking exactly like root systems reaching for the sky. Local legend offers the best explanation for this oddity. It is said that in the beginning of time, the baobab was among the first trees planted by the Great Spirit, but the baobab was vain and wouldn't stop talking, or perhaps it kept walking away, unsatisfied with its location. In frustration, the spirit pulled the trees up by the roots and stuck them back into the ground upside down to keep them quiet. Science tells us they evolved this way to minimize surface area and retain moisture. But standing beneath them, the myth feels more plausible. These giants, specifically the Adansonia grandidieri, are biological marvels. They can live for over 2,500 years. Pause and consider that timeline. When the Roman Empire was just a collection of mud huts on 7 hills, some of these trees were already saplings. They have stood silent witness to the rise and fall of civilizations, the migration of peoples, and the shifting of climates. They are the ultimate survivors. Their trunks are essentially giant living sponges. The wood is fibrous and soft, capable of expanding to store up to 30,000 gallons of water. This adaptation allows them to survive the brutal, desiccating dry seasons of western Madagascar. They are a tree of life in the truest sense, providing shelter for lemurs, fruit for humans, and water to the ecosystem. Their flowers, which bloom for only 24 hours, open at dusk, emitting a scent of rotting meat to attract their primary pollinators, fruit bats and giant hawk moths. But the Avenue of the Baobabs is a haunting, bittersweet wonder. These 25 or so trees lining the dirt road are the last remnants of a dense tropical deciduous forest that once covered this entire area. Over the centuries, as the human population grew, the forests were cleared for agriculture, specifically for rice paddies and sugarcane. The other trees were cut down and burned, but the baobabs were spared, partly because of their spiritual significance, and partly because their soggy, fibrous wood makes for terrible timber and charcoal. Today they stand alone in a graveyard of cleared land. A row of ancient sentinels watching a world that is changing too fast for them to keep up. When you stand beneath them at night, under the unfiltered diamond dust stars of the southern hemisphere, the feeling is transcendent. The Milky Way stretches behind their silhouettes like a celestial river. You do not feel like you are on Earth in the 21st century. You feel like you have stepped into a temple, a living, breathing cathedral that reminds us that biological time is much, much longer and slower than the frantic pace of human life. To reach our final destination, we must turn our backs on the coast and the greenery, journeying deeply, dangerously inland. We are heading into the Adrar Plateau of Mauritania, a swath of the Sahara Desert that feels less like a geographical location and more like a test of psychological endurance. This is a landscape of relentless beige, a flat expanse of sand, gravel, and scourged bedrock that stretches to a shimmering horizon where the earth melts into the sky in a haze of heat. For millennia, nomads and Bedouin traders traversed these sands, guiding camel trains by the stars, unaware that they were walking across one of the planet's most bewildering enigmas. Lies in the terrain, a concentric ridge of resistant rock that breaks the monotony of the dunes, or perhaps a change in the color of the gravel. But the scale is simply too vast for the human eye to comprehend from the surface. It is a mystery that required a change in perspective, a vertical leap of several hundred miles to be unlocked. The revelation arrived in the mid-1960s as the Gemini missions launched the first Americans into sustained orbit. Astronauts drifted over the vast emptiness of North Africa. They were using the Sahara as a reference point for visual navigation because of its lack of cloud cover and the distinct lack of visual clutter. But as they looked down through the capsule windows, the featureless desert stared back. There, etched into the crust of the planet like a fossilized storm, was a giant, unblinking blue eye. This is the Rishat structure, known locally as Guelb-er-Rishat. Spanning nearly 30 miles in diameter, it is a geological colossus visible from the moon. It consists of a series of perfect concentric ridges and valleys, alternating in color and texture, forming a bullseye so precise it unnerves the chaotic mind of nature. For decades following its discovery from space, the scientific community was locked in a fierce debate regarding its genesis. The initial hypothesis was violent and extraterrestrial. Given the perfect circularity and the depression in the center, many geologists assumed this was the scar of a massive meteorite impact, similar to the Barringer crater in Arizona or the Chicxulub impactor that ended the dinosaurs. It was a logical assumption the solar system is a shooting gallery and Earth has been struck before. However, the evidence on the ground refused to cooperate with this theory. An impact of that magnitude would have liquefied the bedrock, creating a specific geological signature known as shocked quartz, grains of sand deformed by instantaneous extreme pressure. Researchers scoured the Rishat for years. They found no shocked quartz, they found no melt glass. They found no chemical traces of an extraterrestrial projectile. Others, favoring romance over geology, looked at the perfect rings and whispered of Atlantis. They cited Plato's dialogues, Critias and Timaeus, in which the philosopher described the fabled city as a series of concentric circles of water and land, alternating like the wheels of a chariot. The dimensions of the Rishat are eerily close to Plato's measurements. And the surrounding mountains match his descriptions to the north. Proponents pointed to the fact that the Sahara was once green and lush, suggesting a lost civilization could have thrived here before the desert took over. While the theory ignites the imagination, the stones tell a different, older story, one that predates humanity by hundreds of millions of years. The geological truth of the Rishat is an eroded dome, or scientifically, a deeply eroded geologic anticline. To understand its creation, one must imagine the violent tectonic history of the planet. Roughly 100 million years ago, when the supercontinent Pangaea was being torn apart by the shifting plates that would eventually separate Africa from South America, the Earth's mantle was restless. A massive plume of molten magma forced its way upward from the depths, pushing against the crust. It was a pimple on the face of the world, a domed uplift of rock layers pushed high above the surrounding plains. However, this magma never erupted. It never exploded into a volcano. It cooled slowly beneath the surface, solidifying into a complex matrix of igneous rocks, gabbros, carbonatites, and kimberlites. Then the most patient forces of nature took over, wind and water. Over millions of years, the climate of the Sahara shifted violently between wet and dry periods. Rain lashed the dome, sandstorms scoured it. The uplift consisted of alternating layers of rock, some hard and resistant like quartzite, others soft and easily eroded like limestone and sedimentary shale. What we see today is the wreckage of that process. The eye is a cross-section of the Earth's crust. The ridges are the hard quartzite rocks that withstood the erosion, standing tall as circular mountains. The valleys between them are where the softer sedimentary rocks were ground into dust and blown away by the Harmattan winds. It is a process called differential erosion. We are looking at the skeleton of a geological event, peeled back layer by layer like a gargantuan stone onion. Standing in the center of the eye is a profound experience. The silence here is not just an absence of noise, it is a physical weight. The center is a flat, dusty pan of breccia, broken rock cemented together by hydrothermal fluids that once boiled here. Scattered across this floor are the tools of our ancestors. The Risha was used as a natural quarry and factory by Paleolithic humans. You can reach down into the sand and pick up an Acheulean hand axe or a spear point. Fashioned by human hands hundreds of thousands of years ago, these early humans sat in the center of this geological anomaly, knapping flint, likely unaware of the grand geometry surrounding them, using the shelter of the ridges to survive. The labyrinth of knives. We must now leave the arid silence of the mainland and cross the Mozambique Channel to the island continent of Madagascar. We are heading to the western region of Meleky, to a place that defies the very logic of biology and geology. This is the Chingi de Bemaraha National Park, a UNESCO World Heritage Site that is the literal definition of look, but do not touch. The local Malagasy people, who have lived in the shadow of this formation for centuries, named it Tsingji. The translation is chillingly practical, where one cannot walk barefoot. This is a massive understatement. To walk here barefoot would be to surrender one's feet to shredded ruin. This is a 580 square mile labyrinth of limestone needles, a stone forest where the trees are not made of cellulose and bark, but of razor-sharp Jurassic rock. The formation of this hostile citadel began over 200 million years ago. This entire region was once a massive lagoon beneath a shallow tropical sea. Billions of tiny marine creatures lived, died, and sank to the bottom, their calcium carbonate shells compacting over eons to form a colossal plate of limestone, thousands of feet thick. Eventually, tectonic activity lifted this limestone bed out of the ocean and into the open air. But the true architect of the Tsingy was water. The heavy tropical rains of Madagascar are acidic, charged with carbon dioxide absorbed from the atmosphere and decaying vegetation. As this rainwater hit the limestone, it began a chemical dissolution process known as karstification. The water didn't just run off, it ate into the rock. It carved vertical fissures, widened cracks into canyons, and dissolved the weaker sections, leaving behind only the hardest, densest spires. Groundwater undercut the plateau from below, creating vast caverns that eventually collapsed, creating the jagged, chaotic skyline we see today. Some of these limestone towers soar over 320 feet into the air, the height of a 30-story skyscraper. But unlike a skyscraper, there are no smooth surfaces. The rock is fluted, serrated, and honed to a fine edge that can slice through thick leather boots, climbing ropes, and human skin with terrifying ease. It is a vertical world of deep, shadowed canyons where the sun only reaches the bottom for a few minutes a day, and razor-edged peaks that bake in the tropical heat. Navigating the Tsingy is a nightmare for human explorers. Expeditions here require specialized gear, iron ladders bolted into the rock, and nerves of steel. A slip here does not result in a bruise, it results in a laceration. There is no soft landing. The terrain is fractal in its complexity, canyons branching into smaller canyons, spires hiding smaller spires. It is a fortress designed by nature to keep intruders out. And yet, in this place that seems designed to extinguish life, evolution has performed a miracle. The Tsingy is not dead. It is teeming with specialized life forms that exist nowhere else on Earth. The most iconic resident is the Deccan's sifaka, a species of lemur with stark white fur and a black face, looking like a curious phantom amidst the grey rock. Watching a sifaka move through the Tsingy is a lesson in physics and audacity. These primates have evolved thick, leathery pads on their hands and feet that act as natural grappling hooks and shock absorbers. They do not crawl, they bound. They launch themselves from one razor-sharp pinnacle to another, clearing gaps of 30 feet in a single leap. They land on vertical spikes that would impale a human, gripping the stone with perfect precision, using the momentum to swing to the next hold. They move with the grace of ballet dancers in a slaughterhouse. They are not alone. In the cool, humid canyons below, where unique microclimates exist, giant snails and rare reptiles thrive. Specialized succulents, like the Pachypodium, anchor their roots into tiny cracks in the limestone, their bulbous trunks storing water to survive the dry season. These plants are survivors. Twisting their bodies to find sunlight in the shadow of the needles. The Tsingy de Bemaraha is a paradox. It is a hostile stone forest that repels humans, yet acts as a sanctuary for its inhabitants. Because it is so difficult to traverse, it has been spared the deforestation and agricultural encroachment that has devastated much of the rest of Madagascar. The limestone walls are a shield, the sharp edges are the guardians. It is one of the least explored places on Earth because it is physically impossible for us to conquer it without immense struggle. And perhaps that is a good thing. In a world where humans have paved, tilled, and tamed nearly every environment, the Tsingy stands as a defiant exception. It is a wonder meant to be viewed from a distance, a place where nature demands not just admiration, but fear and respect. To conclude this leg of our journey, we depart the jagged peaks of Madagascar and return to the western edge of the African continent to the coast of Senegal. Just north of the Cap Vert Peninsula, separated from the crashing waves of the Atlantic Ocean by only a narrow corridor of sand dunes, lies a body of water that defies the color spectrum of the natural world. From the air, it looks like a hallucination or a chemical spill. Amidst the beige sands and the deep azure of the ocean, there lies a lake the color of a strawberry milkshake. This is Lake Retba, known to the world as Lac Rose, the pink lake. The color is arresting. It ranges from a soft, pale mauve at dawn to a violent blood-red crimson at high noon, when the sun is directly overhead. For years, travelers assumed this unnatural hue was the result of industrial pollution or mineral runoff. But the cause is entirely organic, a survival mechanism evolved by a microscopic warrior. Lac Rose is an extreme environment. It is a hypersaline lake, meaning its salt content is exponentially higher than that of the ocean. In some areas, the salinity reaches 40%, rivaling, and in some seasons exceeding, the famous Dead Sea. In such a caustic environment, most forms of life simply desist. Fish cannot survive. Their cells would dehydrate instantly. Ordinary plants wither and die. The water is heavy, oily, and buoyant. But nature abhors a vacuum. Into this salty void stepped a microorganism known as Dunaliella salina. This single-celled, halophilic, salt-loving microalgae is the alchemist of the lake. To survive the lethal combination of crushing salinity and intense, unrelenting tropical solar radiation, the algae produces massive amounts of beta-carotene. This is the same red-orange pigment found in carrots. The pigment acts as a sunscreen for the algae, absorbing the harmful light and protecting the cell's internal machinery. When billions of these organisms bloom simultaneously, they dye the water a vibrant pink. It is a biological battle for survival that results in a visual masterpiece. However, the beauty of Lac Rose acts as a facade for a grueling human reality. If you look closer at the shorelines, you will not see tourists sunbathing. You will see an industrial landscape of manual labor that has remained unchanged for generations. The shores are lined with hundreds of men and women, their skin dusted with a grayish-white film of dried salt. These are the salt harvesters of Senegal. The work is brutal. The harvesters wade out into the lake, often chest-deep in the pink water. They navigate the lake in hand-carved wooden canoes called pirogues. Because the water is so dense, the boats do not sit in the water. They float high on top of it. The men use long poles to smash the crust of salt that forms on the lake bed, then dive down or use shovels to scoop the crystals into their boats. The human body is not designed for this environment. The salinity is so high that prolonged exposure causes the skin to dry out, crack, and bleed. The salt water in a fresh wound is an excruciating pain. To survive their workday, the harvesters cover their bodies in a thick layer of shea butter before entering the water. This natural fat creates a waterproof barrier, a second skin that prevents the brine from corroding their flesh. It is a surreal scene. The neon pink water, the white mountains of harvested salt, piling up on the banks like snow in the desert, and the gleaming, oiled skin of the workers, moving in a rhythm of extraction. They work for 6 or 7 hours a day, battling the sun and the salt. Once the salt is brought to shore, it is the women who take over, carrying heavy basins of the mineral to the drying mounds, sorting it, and preparing it for export across West Africa. The salt from this lake preserves fish, flavors food, and sustains economies thousands of miles away. Lac Rose acts as a living organism. Its color is not static. It changes with the wind, the dilution of rain, and the angle of the sun. It is a reminder that the Earth does not adhere to a standard palette of blue and green. It experiments. It pushes the boundaries of chemistry and biology to see what can survive in the margins. Having witnessed the geological silence of the Mauritanian eye, the razor-sharp evolutionary fortress of Madagascar, and the chemical struggle of the Senegalese coast, we are left with a lingering realization. These places are not magnificent merely because they are beautiful. They are magnificent because they are hostile. They challenge life, they challenge geology, and they challenge us. As we leave the African continent and turn our gaze toward the looming mountain peaks of Asia, we carry with us the knowledge that the Earth is a place of beautiful violence, where the most stunning vistas are often the ones most dangerous to touch. The vertical frontier. Imagine you are standing at sea level. The air is thick, rich, and invisible. You take a breath, and your lungs fill without thought, a mechanical rhythm you have ignored since birth. It is effortless, it is a given. Now strip that comfort away. Imagine climbing into a pressurized rocket and heading toward the edge of the stratosphere, only to step out before you truly leave the Earth. At 29,032 feet, you have reached the summit of Chomolungma, Mount Everest. It is the ceiling of our world. But here is the terrifying secret they do not tell you in the glossy travel brochures or the heroic documentaries. At this altitude, you are not living, you are dying. Your body is effectively being erased cell by cell. You are entering what physiologists and climbers grimly call the death zone. The distinction is not poetic, it is clinical. Above 26,000 feet, the atmospheric pressure is roughly a third of what it is at sea level. There is simply not enough oxygen to sustain human metabolic function. No amount of acclimatization can save you here. You are merely borrowing time against an inevitable biological collapse. Your body, sensing the crisis, begins to cannibalize itself. It shuts down digestion to save energy for the heart and lungs. Your blood thickens to the consistency of sludge as it produces excess hemoglobin in a desperate panic to catch oxygen molecules that aren't there. This increases the risk of stroke and heart attack. With every labored beat, every step takes monumental will. You take a step, and you must rest for 10 breaths. It feels like running an Olympic marathon while breathing through a narrow coffee stirrer. Your brain begins to swell. A condition known as high-altitude cerebral edema, HACE. Your logic begins to fail. The line between reality and hallucination blurs. You see friends who aren't there. You hear voices in the screaming wind. This is the ultimate test of human ego against planetary indifference. Everest is a monument to our desire to stand above everything else, to conquer the unconquerable. But the mountain is indifferent to your struggle. It has been here for 60 million years, ever since the Indian tectonic plate slammed into the Eurasian plate with such violent force that the seafloor was buckled and pushed into the clouds. If you kneel on the summit, fighting for consciousness, and look closely at the grey limestone rocks, you can find marine fossils, remnants of ancient sea creatures, trilobites and crinoids, that once swam in a tropical ocean and are now the highest matter on Earth. But there is a darker, more visceral side to this majesty. Because the mountain is so physically difficult to navigate, it has become the world's highest open-air graveyard. Navigating the path to the summit requires stepping over history. There are colorful parkas visible in the snow, bright reds and yellows that have not faded in the ultraviolet glare. These are the bodies of climbers who sat down to rest decades ago and never stood back up. They are perfectly preserved by the cold, frozen in the exact moment of their resignation. They are now landmarks, silent guardians used by modern climbers to gauge their altitude. Green boots, the sleeping beauty. It is a macabre reminder that the roof of the world is not a playground. It is a cathedral of ice that demands a heavy price for admission. The wind here screams at 100 miles per hour, a sound like 1,000 ghosts shrieking in unison. It tears at your suit, trying to find a way in to freeze your skin in seconds. As you stand there, looking out over the curvature of the earth, seeing the darker blue of space above you, you realize that you aren't conquering anything. You are a guest, a temporary, unwanted nuisance in a place that wasn't built for biology. You are trespassing in the domain of geology. The Sherpas, the indigenous people of these valleys who possess a unique genetic adaptation allowing for efficient oxygen use, treat the mountain with a reverence that borders on fear. They know what the tourists often forget. The mountain always wins. You have to leave. If you stay too long, you become part of the geography. We drop from the highest peaks of the Himalayas, falling north across the Mongolian steppe, plunging from the thin air of the death zone into the deepest scar on the planet's face. Welcome to Siberia, specifically welcome to Lake Baikal. To call this a lake is a linguistic failure. It is an inland sea, a repository of the sacred. Most lakes on Earth are temporary geological features. They are born from retreating glaciers or dammed rivers. They fill up with sediment, they choke on algae, and they disappear over a few thousand years. But Baikal is different. Baikal is ancient. It is 25 million years old, the oldest lake in geologic history. It sits in a rift valley, a place where the Earth's crust is literally pulling itself apart, tearing a hole in the center of the continent. But here, unlike the arid rifts of Africa, the gap has been filled with the purest, clearest, most oxygenated water on the planet. Imagine standing on a sheet of glass that is 5 feet thick. Beneath your boots is 5,387 feet of liquid darkness. This single body of water holds 20% of the world's fresh surface water. That is more water than all the Great Lakes of North America combined. If you were to empty Baikal, every person on Earth, all 8 billion of us, could drink from it for 50 years. Before it ran dry. But numbers are abstract. The sensation of Baikal is visceral. It is in the brutal Siberian winter that Baikal becomes a true wonder of physics and aesthetics. The water is so chemically pure, so devoid of mineral salts and particulate matter, that when it freezes, it doesn't turn cloudy or white. It freezes into massive turquoise slabs of diamond ice. Walking on it is a vertigo-inducing experience. You can look down and see rocks on the bottom 130 feet below, as if the water wasn't even there. It creates a terrifying, magical sensation of walking on air, suspended over an abyss. And then there is the sound. The ice is alive. As the temperature shifts between day and night, the thermal expansion causes the ice to move. It is a seismic symphony. The lake groans, it snaps, it emits deep, booming cracks that sound like heavy artillery fire or the sonar pings of a submarine echoing across the frozen waste. These cracks can run for miles. Tearing the surface open to reveal the black water below. Some locals believe the lake is trying to speak, that Baikal is a sentient entity. They say it is the sound of the spirits that guard the sacred sea. Hidden in this frozen empire is a biological anomaly, the Nerpa. These are the world's only freshwater seals. They are chubby, silver-eyed creatures that look like they belong on an iceberg in the Arctic, yet here they are, thousands of miles from the nearest ocean, trapped in the heart of Russia. How did they get here? Did they swim up prehistoric rivers during the Ice Age? It is a biological mystery that the lake refuses to answer. Baikal is an isolated world, a Galapagos of Russia where evolution has taken a different path. It is home to the golomyanka, a translucent fish made almost entirely of oil and fat that dissolves if you leave it in the sun. It is a time capsule of evolution that reminds us that even in the most brutal cold, life finds a way to become something strange and beautiful. Now we head south, leaving the blue ice of Russia for the arid, rugged mountains of the Mazandaran province in Iran. Your eyes, adjusted to the white and turquoise of the north, will struggle to comprehend the palette before you. Imagine a staircase carved into the side of a mountain. But instead of marble or stone, the steps are made of water and solidified light. This is Badabe Surt. It looks like liquid fire that has been frozen in time, a cascading waterfall of orange, red, and yellow terraces. This wonder is a masterpiece of hydrogeochemistry. It was created by two distinct mineral springs. That have been flowing from the rock for thousands of years. The first spring contains very salty water that is said to heal rheumatism and skin diseases. The second spring is the artist. It is sour to the taste and rich with iron oxide rust. As this water bubbles up from the depths and flows down the mountainside, it degasses. Carbon dioxide escapes into the air, causing the minerals to precipitate and harden into a rock called travertine. Over millennia, this slow, dripping process has built curved walls, creating natural pools that hold the water like cups of wine. The heavy iron content gives the rock its shocking hues of amber, crimson, and gold. It is a stark contrast to the surrounding grey scrubland. When the sun begins to set, the pools turn into mirrors. They reflect the purple and indigo sky, mixing with the orange of the rock to create a landscape that looks more like an impressionist painting than a geological formation. It is a fragile beauty. These terraces take centuries to grow a single inch. yet they can be destroyed by a single heavy footstep crushing the delicate rims of the pools. It is a recurring theme in the natural wonders of Asia. The most magnificent places are often the most delicate. Nature spent ages building these stairways of the gods, using nothing but gravity, water chemistry, and time. Standing here, listening to the soft trickle of the water moving from one terrace to the next, you feel a profound sense of peace. It is a reminder that beauty doesn't always need to be loud or giant or violent. Sometimes it just needs the patience of falling water. Not far from the delicate watery beauty of the terraces lies a place that stands in total opposition to life. We travel southeast to the Kerman province to witness the Dashti Lut, the desert of emptiness. If Everest is where the earth reaches for the sky, and Baikal is where it opens its deep eye, the Lut is where the earth burns. This is officially, scientifically, the hottest place on the surface of our planet. NASA satellites, scanning the globe for thermal anomalies, have measured the ground temperature here at a staggering 70.7 degrees Celsius, 159 degrees Fahrenheit. This is not the heat of a summer day. This is heat as a weapon. In the darker lava fields of the Gandombarian Plateau, the heat is so intense that local folklore claims if you leave a piece of raw wheat on the rocks, it will bake into bread. In some parts of this desert, the environment is abiotic, meaning not even bacteria can survive. If you were to drop a dead bird on the sand here, it wouldn't rot. Because the microbes required for decomposition cannot exist, it would simply dry out, mummify, and turn to dust. But the heat is not the only sculptor here, it is the wind. The wind of 120 days screams across this landscape from June to October. Carrying abrasive sand grains at hurricane speeds. Over millions of years, this sand blasting has carved the bedrock into caloutes. These are massive Yardang formations, ridges of sand and rock that rise up from the desert floor like the skyline of a forgotten alien city. Some stand hundreds of feet tall, shaped like castles, temples, and sphinxes. Walking through the caloutes at dawn feels like walking through a dreamscape on Mars. The silence is so heavy it feels physical, a weight pressing against your eardrums. There is no rustle of leaves, no cry of birds, no hum of insects. Just the sound of your own blood rushing in your ears. Why would anyone come here? Because the Lot is one of the few places on Earth where you can see the skeleton of the planet. It is the world as it was before the softness of life covered it. It is raw, it is honest, it is a place where the sun is the only ruler. A tyrant that scours the land clean every single day. It reminds us that we are incredibly lucky to live in the temperate zones of the world because just a few thousand miles away, the Earth is a furnace that has absolutely no use for us. We leave the blinding sun and the crushing heat. To descend into the cool, damp dark. We travel to the limestone mountains of the Nar al-Kalb Valley in Lebanon to find the Jeta Grotto. We have seen the heights, the depths, the colors, and the heat. Now we see the interior. This is not just a cave. To call it a cave is to insult it. It is a subterranean cathedral, a complex system of cast limestone crystallized over millions of years. The experience is divided into two journeys. You enter the lower grotto via a small boat. Gliding silently across a mirror-still underground river. The air is cool, hovering constantly at a chilly temperature, damp with the breath of the mountain. Above you, the ceiling disappears into the shadows, high as a cathedral nave, and then the lights hit them. The Speleothems. Jeta Grotto is home to the world's largest known stalactite, a 27-foot-long crystal needle hanging from the roof. But that is just one piece of the puzzle. Everywhere you look, the rock has flowed like wax. Stalagmites rise from the floor to meet the stalactites, forming massive columns that look like the pillars of a fantasy palace. These formations grow at a rate of roughly 1 centimeter every 100 years. Every inch of rock you see represents generations of human history. The formations here do not look like stone. They mimic the organic world. They look like draped silk curtains, like jellyfish, like giant mushrooms, like frozen waterfalls. There is a strange psychological effect that happens in Jeta. Because you are so far underground, cut off from the sun and the sky, and because the formations are so alien yet so perfect, you lose your sense of scale. You feel like a microbe inside the gut of a giant organism. The silence here is different from the desert. In the desert, the silence is aggressive. Here it is reverent. It is interrupted only by the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water, the slow, patient tool that carved this entire masterpiece out of solid rock. This process has been happening in total darkness. Since long before the first human walked the earth. It continues now while you watch, and it will continue long after our civilization is gone. It makes you wonder, how many more of these crystal palaces are hidden beneath our feet, locked in the eternal dark, waiting for a light to find them? The saline silence. We end this part of the journey by descending to the lowest point on the surface of the Earth, a place where the air pressure is so high and the heat so oppressive that you feel as though you have stepped onto another planet entirely. You are now standing 1,410 feet below sea level at the shores of the Dead Sea. Everything here operates backward to the logic you have learned since birth. The air is rich in oxygen, thicker than anywhere else on the globe. Yet the water is a trap that refuses to harbor life. It is nearly 10 times saltier than the ocean, a chemical broth of magnesium, calcium, and bromides that feels less like water and more like olive oil. If you try to swim, you realize immediately that you cannot. You do not sink. Gravity seems to lose its grip on you, and you bob on the surface like a piece of cork suspended by the sheer density of the liquid. There is no life here in the conventional sense. There are no fish darting beneath the surface, no seaweed swaying in the currents, and no coral reefs teeming with color. There are only white salt crystals that encrust the shores like jagged diamonds, forming razor-sharp sculptures that glisten under the relentless Middle Eastern sun. If a fish accidentally swims in from one of the freshwater springs that feed this basin, the shock to its system is immediate. It does not survive for more than a few seconds before the brine overwhelms it. Yet, in this hostility, there is a strange, ancient healing power. The black mud beneath your feet is rich in minerals that have been prized since the days of King Herod and Cleopatra. The atmosphere is so thick it acts as a natural filter, blocking out the most harmful ultraviolet rays, allowing you to stay in the sun without burning. People come from all over the world to float and heal. Seeking relief for skin conditions and respiratory ailments in this natural hyperbaric chamber. However, the Dead Sea is dying. It is a wonder in active collapse. Every year, the water level drops by over 3 feet. As the freshwater sources are diverted for human use. As the water recedes, fresh groundwater rushes in to dissolve the underground salt layers, causing the earth to collapse without warning. Massive sinkholes are opening up along the coast, swallowing buildings, roads, and palm groves in seconds. The Earth is reclaiming the space, proving that even the most famous geographical features are temporary. The lowest point on Earth is getting even lower, and soon this saline sanctuary might be nothing more than a white, dusty memory of salt. A testament to how quickly humans can alter the geological map. We have climbed the oxygen-starved peak of Everest and floated in the oily depths of the Dead Sea. But as we look toward the final leg of our expedition, we have to face the truth that our exploration of these magnificent places changes them forever. Leaving the heavy, stagnant air of the Middle East, we travel across the Indian Ocean to a place where the water appears to defy the laws of physics themselves. Imagine you are in a helicopter, the rotors thumping a rhythm in your chest, flying over the southwestern tip of the island of Mauritius. The Indian Ocean below you is a blinding electric turquoise. A color so vivid it looks like it has been painted on the lens of your eye. The sun reflects off the coral reefs, and for a moment, everything feels like a serene tropical paradise. But then the pilot tilts the aircraft, banking sharply over the Le Morne-Brabant Peninsula. And your heart stops. Just off the coast, the ocean floor suddenly vanishes. You are looking down at what appears to be a massive, roaring waterfall underneath the sea. It looks like a colossal drain has been opened at the bottom of the ocean, and millions of gallons of water are cascading into a dark, bottomless abyss. It looks like the Earth is literally leaking, draining the ocean into the mantle below. Your brain screams at you to look away because gravity should not work like this. How can water fall inside water? The visual is so convincing that ships often avoid the area, fearing a current that will pull them down into the dark. The truth, however, is that you are witnessing the greatest optical illusion on the planet. There is no waterfall. There is no bottomless trench sucking the ocean dry. What you are actually seeing is a massive runoff of sand and silt driven by strong underwater currents. The island of Mauritius sits on a prominent ocean shelf, a plateau rising from the deep. Beyond the edge of that plateau, the depth drops violently from a few feet to thousands of feet in a vertical cliff. The ocean currents push the white sand and silt off the shallow plateau and down into the deep, dark, cooler waters. Because the sand is heavier than the water, it flows like a river, cascading down the drop-off. From the air, the movement of that white sand against the dark blue depths creates the perfect visual replica of a waterfall. It is a reminder that our perspective is limited and easily fooled. We see a disaster, but the earth is just moving sand from one place to another. But even when you know the science, the fear remains. When you look at that abyss, you feel the fragility of the land we stand on. We are all just clinging to tiny plateaus of rock in a vast, dark ocean that is always trying to pull the ground out from under us. From the tropical heat of the Indian Ocean, we are instantly transported to the brutal, biting cold of the Siberian interior, leaving the liquid illusion for a fortress of solid stone. We head to the banks of the Lena River in Russia, a place so remote that during the winter, the river itself becomes a highway of ice. Here, the earth has built a barricade against time. Imagine a row of jagged red and gray rock needles rising 980 feet straight out of the water. They stretch for miles along the riverbank, looking like a giant's rib cage or the ruins of a citadel built by gods 500 million years ago. These are the Lena pillars. These structures were formed 500 million years ago during the Cambrian period. To put that in perspective, when the limestone that makes up these pillars was being laid down as sediment on a warm sea floor, life on Earth was unrecognizable. There were no trees, no mammals, no dinosaurs. The world was ruled by trilobites and strange, soft-bodied sea creatures. These pillars are a graveyard of that ancient world, thrust up into the freezing air. They are the product of extreme thermal erosion. In this part of Siberia, the temperature swing is 180 degrees Fahrenheit between the peak of summer and the depth of winter. The rock freezes, expands, cracks, and thaws in a violent cycle that has repeated for eons. Over millions of years, the water has carved away the weak parts of the rock, leaving only these defiant vertical needles standing guard. As you walk among them or glide past them on a boat, the silence is heavy and profound. It is not an empty silence. It is a silence full of history. You are surrounded by 500 million years of layers of ancient seabeds, layers of volcanic ash, layers of time itself compressed into stone. It feels like a library where every book is made of rock. Scientists have found fossils of extinct creatures here that exist nowhere else. Preserved in the limestone like ghosts waiting to tell their story. The Yakut people consider this place sacred, believing the pillars are frozen deities waiting for the end of the world to wake up. Standing at their base, dwarfed by the sheer vertical scale, you realize that humanity is just a footnote in a very, very long story. The Lena pillars do not care about our empires or our technology. They have seen the continents drift and the ice ages come and go. And they will likely be standing long after we are gone. We leave the silent sentinels of the river and ascend to a place of high-altitude tension where fire meets ice on a volatile political border. On the boundary line between China and North Korea sits a mountain called Paektu. It is a sacred place to the people of both nations, a volcano with a history of catastrophic violence. And at its very peak, nestled inside the collapsed caldera, is Heaven Lake. This is one of the highest and coldest crater lakes in the world. For most of the year, from mid-October to mid-June, the lake is a sheet of white ice surrounded by jagged volcanic peaks that look like the sharp teeth of a dragon. When the ice melts, the water is a deep, dark blue, so pure and still it looks like liquid ink. But there is a tension here that has nothing to do with the freezing wind. This is a forbidden wonder. Access is restricted, guarded by the militaries of two nations who watch each other across the water, and the volcano itself is not dead, it is merely sleeping. In the year 946, this mountain produced the Millennium Eruption, one of the most powerful volcanic events in recorded human history. It ejected so much ash and pumice that it coated northern Japan and altered the global climate. The magma chamber beneath your feet is still active, a ticking time bomb that geologists watch with nervous anticipation. Adding to the mystery, local legends insist the lake is bottomless and that a creature, the Lake Tianchi monster, patrols the deep, cold waters. While scientists dismiss this as mythology or misidentified schools of trout, the locals swear they have seen something massive breaking the surface of the mirror-still water, creating waves where there should be none. Whether it is a prehistoric survivor, a trick of the light, or just the wind coming off the Sea of Japan, Heaven Lake feels like a place that belongs to another dimension. The air is so thin you feel lightheaded, and the silence is so absolute you can hear your own heartbeat in your ears. It is a heaven that feels like it could turn into hell at any moment if the giant sleeping beneath the water decided to wake up. From the brooding danger of the volcano, we travel south to the Philippines, where the landscape shifts from menacing to bizarrely playful. As if the Earth decided to experiment with geometry. We move to the island of Bohol. You are standing on a viewing deck, looking out over a landscape that looks like it was designed by a mathematician with a sweet tooth. Spread across 19 square miles, are over 1,200 perfectly symmetrical dome-shaped hills. They are not jagged mountains. They are smooth, rounded hills that look like they were turned out of a giant mold. During the rainy season, they are covered in lush green grass, vibrant and alive. But when the dry season hits, the grass withers and turns a deep cocoa brown. Suddenly, you are not looking at a jungle anymore. You are looking at 1,200 giant Hershey's Kisses dropped onto the plains. Geologically, these are known as conical karst formations. They are made of marine limestone that was once a coral reef teeming with life underwater. Tectonic forces lifted the reef out of the sea, and for millions of years, rainwater has dissolved the limestone, eroding it into these perfect cones. But that scientific explanation feels hollow when you see the sheer perfection of the shapes. How can nature be so repetitive, so organized? It looks artificial, like a terraforming project gone wrong. The local legends offer a more poetic explanation. They say two giants got into a feud and threw giant clumps of sand and rock at each other for days. When they finally got tired and became friends, they left the battlefield without cleaning up the mess. Looking at the hills, you can almost see the mess of the Titans, but there is a mystery here. Why only in Bohol? Why are there no other chocolate hills of this scale and symmetry anywhere else on the planet? The Earth created a one-of-a-kind masterpiece here and then broke the mold. It is a landscape that feels playful, a rare moment where the planet seems to be having fun with its own architecture. Leaving the open, rolling hills, we plunge into the dense, humid embrace of the Nigerian rainforest to find a wonder that is hidden from the sky. Deep in the Enugu state of Nigeria, there is a place that feels like a glitch in the map. To get there, you have to hike through a dense green forest, navigating rough terrain until you reach a massive limestone monolith that seems to block your path. This is the Ahum Cave. But it is not just a cave in the traditional sense. A 98-foot-high waterfall drops from the top of the cliff, but instead of falling into a river or a pool, it disappears into a narrow, winding canyon that leads into a series of massive, open-roofed caverns. The water is crystal clear, and strangely, it is warm throughout the seasons. The locals believe this water has healing powers, capable of driving away evil spirits and curing diseases. They come from all over the country to stand beneath the spray, believing the earth is washing away their troubles. As you walk deeper into the cave system, the light from the entrance begins to fade, replaced by a soft, ethereal glow reflecting off the wet limestone walls. The sun filters down through the narrow slit at the top of the canyon, creating beams of light that look like solid pillars. The sound is overwhelming. In the enclosed space of the cave, the roar of the waterfall is amplified and trapped, bouncing off the walls until you cannot hear your own thoughts. It is a sensory deprivation tank built by nature. You lose your sense of direction, your sense of time, and your sense of the outside world. It is a sacred site. Protected by a local monastery, and the monks guard it with a reverence usually reserved for cathedrals. It is one of the few places where wonder and spirituality are the same thing. The earth here is not trying to scare you with magma or freeze you with ice. It is trying to hold you. But the scale of the cave is a reminder. We are very small, and the earth has many secret rooms we have not even walked into yet. Finally, we emerge from the darkness of the cave, blinking against the sudden brilliance of the tropical sun. We leave behind the subterranean echoes to travel to the emerald waters of Southeast Asia for a balancing act that seems to defy the fundamental laws of physics. Our final destination lies deep within the heart of Phang Nga Bay, Thailand. To get there, you must surrender to the rhythm of the water. You are on a traditional long-tail boat, the engine purring softly behind you, a mechanical heartbeat propelling you through a humid, dreamlike atmosphere. You weave through a maze of massive limestone islands that rise like emerald towers from the Andaman Sea. These aren't just rocks. They are ancient vertical giants draped in lush vegetation, plunging sheerly into the water below. The air is thick with salt and heat, and the water is a calm, opaque green, inviting you deeper into the labyrinth. And then the boat slows. The engine cuts to a low idle. You turn a corner around a jagged cliff face, and suddenly the horizon opens up. There, framed by the open sea and the sky, you see it, Khao Ta Pu. At first glance, your brain struggles to make sense of the geometry. It is a 65-foot-tall rock tower standing entirely alone in the water, isolated from the surrounding island chains. But here is the problem, the visual glitch that catches your breath. The top is much, much wider than the base. It looks top-heavy, precarious, like a giant limestone nail that has been driven into the ocean floor upside down by some celestial carpenter. It defies gravity. By all logical reasoning, it looks like it should have tipped over thousands of years ago, splashing into the bay and disappearing forever. It stands with a kind of arrogant elegance, a stone sentinel that has refused to fall despite the odds stacked against it. For many, this formation is instantly recognizable, though perhaps not by its Thai name. This is the James Bond Island, etched into global pop culture by the 1974 film The Man with the Golden Gun. It was here that the villain Francisco Scaramanga hid his solar weapon, choosing this otherworldly landscape because it looked too fantastic to be real. The movie gave the rock a layer of cinematic mystique, transforming a geological oddity into a symbol of adventure and danger. However, while the film made it famous, the real star here is the geology itself. The drama on the screen pales in comparison to the slow-motion drama playing out in the rock itself. Kautapu is a masterclass in the brutality of time. The structure is a karst tower, a remnant of a massive coral reef system that thrived here hundreds of millions of years ago. Over eons, tectonic shifts pushed the seabed upward, and the elements began to carve away the softer stone. But the specific shape we see today, that terrifyingly thin neck, is the result of a specific relentless attack at the waterline. The base of the tower is being constantly eroded by the tide and the microscopic movements of the waves. It is a chemical and physical assault. The seawater, slightly acidic, eats at the calcium carbonate of the limestone. Simultaneously, bioerosion is taking place. Mussels, boring sponges, and other marine life attach themselves to the rock at the tidal line, drilling tiny holes and weakening the structure from the outside in. Every year, the ocean eats away a few more fractions of an inch of the rock. This creates a profound tension as you gaze at it. You are looking at a structure that is living on borrowed time. Eventually, the physics will win. The neck of the tower will become too thin to support the massive tonnage of the vegetation-covered top section. On some future day, perhaps in a century, perhaps tomorrow, Kautapu will snap. It will crash into the emerald water, sending a tidal wave through the bay and vanish into the sea, leaving nothing but a stump and a memory. It is a wonder on a deadline. It is a masterpiece that is currently being destroyed by the very water that makes it beautiful. The sea created it by carving away the surrounding rock, and the sea will eventually reclaim it. Standing there, bobbing on the gentle waves, the engine silent, you realize that magnificent does not mean permanent. In our human arrogance, we often assume that mountains and stone are eternal, unchanging backdrops to our fleeting lives. But Kautapu proves otherwise. The earth is fluid. It is just moving at a pace too slow for us to perceive. Until we see something as fragile as this, the most magnificent things on earth are often the ones that are about to disappear. The precarious nature of the rock demands your attention not just because it is beautiful, but because it is finite. You stare a little longer, taking in the texture of the stone and the green of the trees clinging to the summit. Because you know, deep down, that future generations might only see this in photographs. It is a balancing act, a geological grand finale, and we are the lucky audience catching the show before the curtain falls. The soul of the machine. We have seen the fire of Africa, the giants of Asia, and the illusions of the Pacific. We started this journey thinking we were looking at places. But now you know better. You have not been looking at places, you have been looking at a process. You have been looking at the earth as it breathes, as it grows, as it destroys itself to create something new. The magnificent places are not just beautiful views, they are warnings, they are reminders that we live on a planet that is indifferent to our presence. The Danakil does not care if you are hot. Everest does not care if you are breathing, the Lena pillars do not care if you are impressed, and yet we keep coming, we keep searching, we keep building 4K cameras and flying drones into volcanoes because we need to feel that wonder. We need to know that there is something bigger than our screens and our cities. But as we end this journey, I have one final controversial question for you. We have conquered the map. We have satellite photos of every inch of the Sahara and GPS coordinates for every peak in the Himalayas. By turning these secret, sacred wonders into tourist destinations and viral videos, have we actually destroyed the very thing that made them magnificent? Is a wonder still a wonder if everyone has a selfie with it? Or have we traded the mystery for a view count? Maybe the most magnificent place on Earth is the one we have not found yet, the one that is still silent, the one that is still waiting for its first intruder. If you have followed this journey through all three parts, you are now a witness to the machine. Do not just watch the world, respect it.